And we are live. Episode 50-something.
Oh my, 57. I'm excited for this one. I'm so excited.
I'm excited for this one too because we are joined by ABA Inside Track. They are psychologists who run their own podcast, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's
right. Today we are joined by Rob and Diana, or Diana and Rob, respectively, who are both BCBA. Diana is a professor in a university. You would like to let us know which university that is?
Sure, Regis College.
Regis College. And Rob is also a BCA psychologist in a public school who works with kids with like autism and different mental health
whatever the needs are.
Issues.
Yeah.
The thing is, I have to be very careful with what I say because nowadays people are getting, canceled left, right, and center. So
there are a lot of it's mostly I'm called in if there's a younger student or actually an older student, I guess, who's having problems in the classroom. And those problems could be problems that they feel are problems they want help with. It could be problems that are making it hard for that student to learn in the classroom, disrupting others, disrupting themselves. Maybe it's the parents who'd like some support. Maybe it's the teachers. Maybe it's everybody. So it's pretty varied as to who I would be asked to come and work with and help out.
Interesting. Okay, so for people like me who are not too sure what these abbreviations stand for, so ABA, what does that stand for?
It stands for Applied Behavior Analysis.
Applied Behavioral Analysis. Interesting. And so how long have you guys been in this field for?
Sure. So we have both been in this field close to 20 years, believe it or not.
Wow.
So we started quite a long time ago. And I believe for both of us, we were interested in working with individuals with special needs and found ourselves at a company that provided those services, and they have graduate programs there. So we attended different graduate programs, but met during that time period. And then each went on to get our master's in a related field. And then Rob got an additional certification to be a behavior analyst. And I got my PhD in behavior analysis as well.
Interesting. Okay. So you guys are like far into the whole psychology aspect of ABA. So like you got your master's, you're very well qualified. Mm-hmm. So, okay, now I know which route of questions. I have a lot of questions.
And we're not licensed psychologists, so I don't want to present us.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Fair. So, but it's mainly to do with kids because as I've mentioned before on my podcast, I do have severe ADHD. It took a lot of behavioral psychologists and child psychologists to help me out. Fun time.
Yeah. But now you can do a 1-hour podcast and focus. So that works. It worked out.
They did. Like I remember one of my psychologists did actually suffer from ADHD. He helped me with hyperfocus, how to maintain and control hyperfocus, which is something interesting. So let's get into. Where do you guys want to start with?
What is ABA? Yeah, break it down. What is ABA? Mm-hmm.
Sure. Let me see if I can give you a succinct definition of behavior analysis. So when we're talking about behavior analysis, we're talking about the process of learning how and why human behavior occurs. And I say human behavior when we're talking about applied behavior analysis because we're really focusing on socially significant problem behavior such that there may be behavioral deficits or excesses for any individual. You'll need any type of diagnosis, right, to have something that you want to work on in your life. And through learning about how behavior operates under different environmental arrangements, we can better understand if someone is looking to make a change in their own behavior or the behavior of someone that they love, how that can really come about. And we do that largely by making those types of environmental changes, either by providing additional supports on the front end or by providing additional what we call reinforcers or kind of like rewards on the back end. And through that process, we can help someone practice a new skill and learn it to fluency such that we can then take out those extra supports and have that behavior continue on its own in an adaptive way.
Awesome. Could you give us an example of, like, what's a common problem behavior and how do you work around it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's talk. We'll talk young children, because I think a lot of people who are listening, they might have their own children, or maybe they know someone who has it as a young child. So a lot of the ways that children learn is through what goes on in their environment. So we think about like a young baby. How do babies communicate?
A young baby,
not an old baby, a young baby. So a little baby. And the little baby is going to get attention or food or stimulation by crying. And we accept that. We're not like, geez, baby, why don't you tell me what you want? Because they're babies. They don't know how to talk yet. But over time, some of those same problem behaviors, you might see that with, say, a toddler or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old. And you see them at the store and they want something. And what are they doing when they don't get it? When they're told, no, you can't have that. They throw them. Well, they don't go to stores these days because they're stuck at home now. But when they used to go to stores, they would they cry. They flop, they cry, they're kicking and they're screaming. And again, we kind of look at we usually kind of look and say, thank God that's not my kid, or I'm going to leave now. But
I say solidarity, mama.
But exactly, the child learned that because at some point in their life, crying and screaming has totally worked as a strategy for getting what that child wanted. And only through, meeting that new contingency of, oh, wait, now that I'm 5 or 6, I'm expected to earn money or wait, or, for our kids, we have like a pom-pom jar for when they, do their chores, and they have to earn so many before they can get a new toy. So there's new learning that has to happen. And for some kids, they get it real, the first time their mom says, you know what, or dad says, I'm just going to walk out of the store. We're going to go to the car. We're going to leave. I'm not going to draw attention to this. They sort of learn, oh, that crying didn't lead to the outcome I wanted. So I'll stop crying. Next time I'll do something else. What if I ask politely? Or what if I give my mom, my full jar of pennies or something? And then, oh, that's so sweet of you. I'll buy that toy for your son. So there's something else I need to do. But again, depending on all of our learning, we don't all learn the same way. Ali, like you were saying, you have ADHD. So the way you learn might not be the same way that Ali H that you learn. So for some kids, this lesson can be difficult. Maybe it's difficult because they have a disability. Maybe it's difficult because their parent could have a disability, or their parent might have, learned a different way when they were growing up, and it's not the most effective way to teach, but it's what they know, so it's what they do. So a lot of times it's sort of figuring out, okay, how did we get here? Did that child learn to tantrum? Because all children tantrum to some extent. Like, it's not abnormal for a little kid to cry and scream, but has it become a problem in that they always cry and scream, and their parent is asking for help because they don't know how to respond, or their crying and screaming is so intense that you can't ignore it or just take them out to the car, because then they try to throw themselves into traffic or do something really dangerous. So we can't just, I'll ignore you, kid. So really it's a pattern of, okay, how did we get here? And what are the steps we can take now to reteach a new behavior, a new way of getting things? And depending on the family, depending on the student, depending on the need of all the individuals, that can be really complicated. It could be really simple. But really our job is to sort of figure out what's going to be the best kind of dosage of treatment. So sort of like Ali, you were saying, in medical school, there's a lot of medicines you can just give people. Like, here, I'll give you all the medicine. But that's not how medicine works. You have to figure out, okay, why are you coming in? No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm not the doctor. I'm not a medical doctor.
It's not that way, but you're kind of, yes and no. How about we say yes and no? Like, getting into it's a huge conversation.
There's some amount of like talking to your patient about what's going on, because you wouldn't just say, what you're describing. You have a fever. Have all the antibiotics. You kind of want to get more information.
I mean, this is what differentiates between a good and bad doctor. So a good doctor follows the simple rules of, let's try and keep this as natural as possible before we start giving medication. And a doctor who just is not in the mood for the day would just be like, antibiotics, you're good to go. But touching on the tantrum, I have a funny story. So I have a younger brother. He's like 2 years older, younger than me. As kids, our trick to get whatever we want from the toy shop is, my younger brother would cry, but like by the age of 6 or 7, he stopped having, like, he just couldn't cry. He was not bothered. So he once asked me, okay, we got to get this toy. How are we going to convince them? I told him, crying, that's the only thing that works. He was like, yeah, but I can't cry. I was like, I have an idea. He's like, what? I punch him in the stomach as hard as I can. He starts crying, and I'm like, okay, good, you're crying. This is working. We got the attention. Don't say it's because I punched you. Say we want the toy, and it would work like a charm.
No.
It would
Oh
always
my
work.
goodness. See,
Yeah.
but now you run the risk though of your brother learning, okay, I want a toy. How do I get a toy? I got to cry. How do I cry? I got to get a punch. So over time, there's always a danger that he's like, you know what I love? Being punched in the stomach. And someone might say, what, that's terrible. Why would you like that? And of course, well, I used to get punched in the stomach, so I would cry, so I would get a toy. So I have this long history in my life where getting punched actually leads to awesome outcomes.
Thank God it was a one-time thing.
One time and it was over. Again, most people are like, that was so unpleasant. Like the one time, maybe the second and third time, I think I'll just, I'll save up some money. Because you get older, you can get a job, at some point.
Yeah. Well, no, it's mainly just, you want to buy this? I have to convince him why he needs this thing, and I really want this thing. So we end up like splitting the cash in half, and like I keep all the stuff.
There you go. Much better than getting
more, you know.
And a lot of that's about what's I think really exciting about studying human behavior is that there are a lot of patterns that are going to be the same. And I know everyone has a different set of histories. How did they learn? What environment did they grow up in? Who were their parents? There's some amount of, who you are genetically that's going to be a part of it as well. But at the end of the day, when certain occurrences happen over and over and over, following some behavior or whatever it is, it's going to either make us more likely or less likely to engage in that behavior in the future, whether we're reinforced for that behavior or punished for that behavior. And you can, spend hours, I think it's probably something that, either high level or like graduate level students do a lot of like, why would someone do blank? And then you brainstorm, you think about all the reasons that this new behavior could have come up. Because again, while we all have differences in how we respond, the patterns or how we learn as organisms, as humans, that's going to be the same no matter who you are, because we're all, at the end of the day, we're humans. So some of those kind of rules of behavior are going to be the same. Our responses will be different, but sort of the rules of learning are the same.
Amazing.
Interesting. I have a question I wanted to ask. You want to go first, Ali?
No, you can ask, Ali. Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of children and adolescent psychology, how would you split it between nature and nurture? Like, what's primal instincts, what percentage of the way they think is primal, and what percentage of the way they think is logical and rational? How would you place the percentages on that, like the ratio?
Sure. So, we talk a lot. We talk in different terms, I think, than the terms that you're thinking in, but it kind of all boils down to the same, right? So behavior can fall into different categories depending on what drives the behavior. So there's behavior that's called respondent behavior and behavior that's called operant behavior. So respondent behavior is behavior that includes things such as reflexes, right? That you're kind of come into the world with. So you know how they always talk about the Bensky reflex with the baby. So like if you touch a baby's foot, their toes splay out.
Yep.
Yeah, a young baby, just only the young kind do that. So like you're born with that, right? And it's just in response to a stimulus, right? So something in the environment flicks your foot, you do it. And you have a lot of those when you're born, and some of them you keep throughout your life, right? Like if you blow a puff of air into your eye, you will most definitely blink as long as you're alive, right? Like that reflex you keep throughout your lifetime. So that type of behavior falls into the respondent behavior category, and you can teach other behavior that will also operate in the same ways. The classic example is Pavlov with the dog and the bell and the salivation and the food, right? Does that sound familiar? But it's limited what you can really do with respondent behavior, right? There's not that much of it that we sort of come into the world with. Operant behavior is this really large category of behavior that's learned during the lifetime of the organism. And that starts right after birth. You start learning things right away, although they start out being pretty simple things that you learn, right? And the trajectory of development over the course of childhood is very complex. And almost all of that behavior is operant behavior, meaning that it's behavior that you don't come with into this world, but that's learned through the process of basically trial and error in life, right? You eventually start to learn how to motor about, you learn language, right? And you start to build upon that into more complex social skills, play skills, developmental skills, self-help skills, motor skills, etc. Right? So while it seems as though maybe we kind of come in with more as a behaviorist, we really see it as behavior that's learned during your lifetime. There's another level of behavior as well, which is cultural behavior. So that's behavior that is maintained and sustained by the verbal community and the cultural group in which you live. And that's why we have different areas of the world, right, that place different values on different things and sort of have different social mores and customs. All of that operates at this like larger social level, which is really cool stuff to talk about, but is not the question that you asked.
Well, we can get into that if you'd like.
Yeah.
That's actually interesting.
That's an
how
interesting.
different cultures affect the growth of different kids. Like,
well, behaviors. Some behaviors are like accepted in some cultures, and some behaviors are like not in a lot of cultures. Have you guys seen anything that like that exemplifies that?
I mean, things seem pretty calm around the country right now. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, all the, I mean, all the time. It's. I mean, it's a topic that's been increasingly discussed in a lot of fields. So a lot in psychology, other human services, and behavior analysis has sort of it's been more at the forefront of sort of thinking and thought papers and research papers in the past, like a lot in the past 5 years, and then increasingly more. Just like something comes up, because again, art science is about being applied, and if you are working with a family who's not of the same culture that you are. So like for Diana grew up in the southern part of the United States. I grew up in New England. So even though, well, yeah, we're from America, we have very different cultural norms, even among, our not that huge geographical difference. For example, when you get to one of those things at the road and you drive around in a circle, I call that a rotary. The only people who call that a rotary are people who are from Massachusetts. Everyone else calls it a roundabout or a traffic circle. And because that's been shaped. But so if I'm working with a family from
you actually call it traffic circle?
No, I don't call it a traffic circle. That's nuts.
People actually call it that?
Yeah. Somebody does, not me, not you. It sounds like
circle.
We call it roundabouts.
Roundabouts.
I think roundabout's the more common phrase, but I've always known it as a rotary. That's what I learned growing up. So, it's somewhat easy when you're working with a family in like your neighborhood of your, same socioeconomic class and race and cultural background, because you can make assumptions that are probably going to be true because they probably had a similar upbringing. So a lot of what they learned throughout their life is the same as what you learned throughout your life. But if you want to be in applied science,
you still shouldn't make assumptions. You
should never make assumptions. No. But there are a couple shortcuts you might feel more comfortable taking.
Maybe in the States, but here you can pretty much assume like the upbringing because we're literally all brought up the same way. So like,
but that's going to be different. But if I flew over and I was like, I'm going to be a behavior analyst here now, and I wanted to be applied, and I came in and said, I assume you all have the exact same problems and learning of
99%
a white
you'll be right.
male. Yeah, but I'd assume it by me. So I assume you were raised in Massachusetts and you had the exact same background, and everyone went to the beach during the summer. You all went to some sort of a New England private school, right? If I jumped in and made that assumption, I'm immediately going to alienate the people I'm working with, because they're going to say, well, you clearly don't know who I am. You don't sound like you care who I am. Right. I don't really want to talk to you anymore. So, and then even within a culture that might have more homogeneity, like you're saying, Ali, like there's a lot of the same background and growing up, everyone still has experiences that are going to be different. So really what's important is learning not just about, like I assume that if you're from here, this is how you believe and how you were raised, but more about what are some of the things that I know about this culture, and then listening and learning about, okay, what can you tell me about yourself and your experiences? Because the more I know about that, the more I can help you come up with a solution that is going to be meaningful to you and that you like. Because I could tell you, if you said my kid's crying and my kid won't go to sleep at night, I could tell you, well, you could do this. Research says this works. But that might not work for your family. That might not work for your cultural background or upbringing. That might not work for how you want to raise your child. And if I only give you one solution and I tell you that's the solution, you probably are going to say, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to go find someone else. And you might find someone who does a better job doing my job. You might find someone who doesn't actually know what they're doing, but they know how to tell you what you want to hear and then charge you money for that privilege. And again, Ali, I'm sure they talk about this in medical school, and Ali, I'm sure you've seen this a bit as an RPT of people at the end of the day, they want to solve problems, but if someone can do it in a way that makes them feel like they're empowered, they're part of the solution, they're going to go with that solution. Might not be the best solution at the end of the day, though. So you really have to balance that out, and that can be really tricky. And that's why a lot of fields have just become rich on telling people what they want to hear and then charging them for it, but there are no results.
But there is a happy medium there as well, where you can be, culturally competent and good at your job. And sort of hit the middle spot, the sweet spot there.
That's ideal. That would be the perfect. That's what you're working towards.
Provide good services. That would be the best.
Looking for that little gray area in between.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like we said before, I think before we started recording too, is as a behavior analyst, like we should only be addressing problems if someone comes to us and says, this is a problem for me, right? So us coming in and saying, we see that your child is not feeding himself, right? And for me, in my culture, that's a problem if he's 4 years old, right? But in another culture, that may not be a problem for a child who's 4, right? It may be common for the family to continue to feed the child. So us just bullying our way in there and saying, everyone step aside, right? I come prepared
and
with reinforcers, right? Like that's not appropriate. And we need to only be addressing problems in the context of what's needed for that family to function well and for that individual to function well based on what they see as important to them for us to be properly doing our job.
Yeah. So in other words, you don't answer a question if it wasn't even asked in the first place.
How do parents know to go to a behavioral therapist as opposed to some other kind of doctor or psychologist or child psychologist? What's how do you
It's really gonna vary. I mean, certainly for a lot of problems, we might actually recommend step one is going to see your medical doctor, because there are actually some behavior problems, especially you see this a little bit more often with children with developmental disabilities. So perhaps they don't have the same they don't have an age appropriate amount of communication, or they have a hard time labeling how they're feeling, because sometimes problem behaviors are caused by I'm in pain and I don't know how to express what's going on. So a lot of times we will recommend, at least talk to your doctor, rule out a couple things.
Definitely.
Especially if it has to do with like they're not eating a lot, or they're having trouble sleeping, or they just cry out of the blue and they just seem upset and I can't tell why. Sometimes it is a medical issue. So we want to make sure to, include doctors in that. And then it really will depend on sort of what the family is specifically looking for. If they're like, I would love ideas of how to set up more like systems in my house. So like schedules, or know how to let my child know when I think they're doing a good job, or how to respond to them when they're engaging in problem behavior, then you may choose to go to a behavior analyst rather than, say, a child psychologist. Although, again, there are a lot of child psychologists who will probably tell you very similar information. We have a book we love. We did on our podcast, we did a book series or a book club on the power of positive parenting, which was written by a child psychologist. He very clearly, you read the book and he loves behavior and analysis. He talks about how he loves behavior analysis, but he's not a BCBA. He just never got the credential. But he clearly knows what he's talking about in terms of behavior analysis and using behavior.
His name is Dr. Glenn Latham, if anyone wants to look him up.
So sometimes you really, it might not matter too much which professional you go to. Typically, I would say if a family wants something that's more like what you think of as a therapy. So like, let's sit down, let's talk about a problem that's bothering you, let's meet regularly to talk about it, come up with strategies. You may decide that going to a psychologist or child psychologist is a better fit for you. Like if that's the kind of work you want done, that may be better. Although again, there are a lot more behavior analysts who are now practicing in the field of, say, a therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy are ones that really very much speak to the science of human behavior. So sometimes it's kind of just a name difference based on I got licensed here, or I got licensed there, or I went to school for this. So you may be talking to a BCBA who you're like, you sound like I would think a psychologist would sound like. Similar, you might talk to a psychologist like, you sound like a BCBA that I had in my house. So sometimes the lines are kind of blurry.
Right. And mostly, so you're saying ABA is usually corrective for like some lacking in skill or behavior, or could be
not really more than I think any other any other science or psychology would be. You know, a lot of problem behaviors stem from response that might not be considered ideal, maybe by the individual themselves. So let's look at anxiety. I think that's a topic that's been increasingly a problem, certainly here in the United States. I think a lot of places around the world following this pandemic. I think anxiety is going to be a huge challenge. Oh, now we someone grabbing a snack. So when we think about what anxiety is, we're typically talking about sort of our response, a learned response to when we see stressors in the environment. And over time, some of those stressors, become something more. It's more about how we're thinking about that situation than, I'm going to be attacked. Like we hear a noise. What are the odds someone's actually going to like jump out, or a lion is going to jump out and eat you? Pretty low. I mean, unless you're at like an escaped zoo place or something, it's not going to happen. But we have this long history where when we hear a noise, we tend to, ooh, what's that? We look around, we have those heightened reflexes, heightened senses for a little bit of time, because there's a sense of this isn't right. So when we think of what anxiety is, it's mostly taking that response and kind of overgeneralizing it to now I'm nowhere near danger. Like this is not a helpful pattern I'm following into, but I'm probably doing some amount of, we call them private events, but thinking basically about there's something happening, what's going to happen. I bet it's something dangerous. I bet something bad's going to happen. And we all do this to some extent every single day. Like if you actually stop and think about how many times you've engaged in some sort of anxious thinking, we've all done it a few times. The difference is for most of us, we do it a little bit. We recognize we're doing it. We stop and we move on with our lives. When you have an anxiety disorder, you're not able to move on from it. It's making it harder for you to do things that you would otherwise want to be doing. So in that regard, if someone came and said, I have a lot of anxiety around going to school, going to work, going outside, it would be more talking about kind of like a retraining of the skill of like acknowledging what's happening, giving them something else that they could do, perhaps a breathing exercise, perhaps just exposure to being in that setting, and then acknowledging, what are the feelings, what are the thoughts and the feelings, how's your body feeling in that setting, and pairing it over and over and over again. So in that regard, it's the same as, it's teaching a skill, but I don't think I would necessarily call it like because you have anxiety, that means you failed to learn a skill. I would more say it's just sort of thinking about what you're currently doing, and then is that getting you where you want to be? And if not, let's talk about some other solutions and some other ways you might be able to get there. And again, a lot of the acceptance and commitment therapy especially really is looking at that. Like, what is it you want out of life? What are your values? And then helping people develop skills to get there. It's not me telling you this is what you need to do. I could do that. I like doing that. It's fun to tell people what to do, but it doesn't always lead to change, because what I tell you to do might not actually be what you want to do, or you might disagree with me for any number of reasons. It might be bad advice, might be my own history. This worked for me, doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody else,
All right. And awesome. Usually when we talk about behavioral analysis, it's someone with anxiety or someone with developmental disorder, right? Do you think these tools could be used by a general, more like wide range of people? I'm thinking, so when I meant by corrective behavior, it's like in psychology, there are some fields which deal with solving problem behaviors, and there are some fields like human psychology that tend towards, okay, this is how we should live our lives, and move towards that. So behavioral analysis stems more on the corrective, or do you think there's like a general set of behavioral principles that we should all live by?
There are a general set of behavioral principles that are going to be applicable across individuals and conditions. I think behavior analysis tends to work in a one-to-one capacity, right? Because everyone is different. So it's very much an individualized approach, as I know you know, because there's going to be different sort of internal setting events and external setting events that are going to impact any particular environmental changes that we want to make, right? And how one person is going to respond to that is going to be just how that one person responds to that. So we can be quite good at making changes on an individual level. Some areas of behavior analysis do look at changes on larger societal levels, and you'll see some of that research published in areas such as environmental sustainability, for example. There's some older work that was looking at sort of more global changes that one can make with regard to energy use or recycling behavior or something along those lines. And then if you are familiar with or read about the nudge research, it's doing a lot of the same ideas, which is providing, remember how I said before, like providing those upfront supports or additional consequences or rewards afterwards. So making tweaks to how those arrangements look at a large scale, and you will see changes in behavior for a portion of the population. However, there's always going to be these extra variables, right? Extra contextual components there when you're looking at sort of large group level responding, and those individual variations can muddy the waters as far as effectiveness of a particular treatment or intervention. So it's not that you can't apply behavior analysis to large scale problems. I think you can, and I think you should. But really, when we talk about behavior analysis as the science of human behavior, it is a tool to understand, right? Like what's going on. So we could say, oh, we're going to give everybody $5 if they bring in their own reusable cup to Starbucks, right? And we'll likely see a change in behavior occur for some portion of that group, right? But we won't see it for everyone. And it's not that that wasn't effective at an individual level, right? It is in some cases, and it is not in some cases. And behavior analysis is going to allow you to go in and figure out why, right? So if that didn't work for someone, well, why? Maybe they don't like coffee, right? I can't imagine, but apparently some people are like that, right? Or maybe they're so rich that they don't care, that they don't need the $5. Can't imagine that either, but some cases, right? So there's going to be individual variations in effectiveness, and that's all accounted for within the, how we think about behavior. But applying things at a large scale, you need to take into consideration a lot of different contextual variables.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, on a similar vein, though, I think there are definitely some universal principles that if we could wave the magic wand and be like, I hope everyone does this now, we would probably see pretty fast widespread changes. So certainly thinking about how do human societies function. A lot of the behavior that we engage in is based on societal rules that are all about coercion. They're about do this or else, do this and something bad will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Not a lot is based on do this and then something good happens.
Good, right.
And you think about that. Exactly, positive reinforcement. That's it. And many of our, even like as parents, many of our parenting steps are not based in positive reinforcement. And it's hard, we weren't necessarily all raised with nonstop positive reinforcement for, the important behaviors. A lot of times it's easier when your kids are making a lot of noise to be like, shut up, rather than like wait for them to be quiet and then tell them, hey, I appreciate how quiet you are. You're the best. Most of it, because again, which one is going to work faster to get this like loud noise out of your environment? So a lot of it is shaped by how humans just work. But a lot of it is sort of just how things have been done for a long time. So when we think about recent issues now with, especially here in the United States with police, well, and this is not meant to be some sort of like, well, we shouldn't blame the police or we shouldn't change how things are done. That's not it. But why would police often engage in more violent behavior? Because again, their role is, when you think about what's a police officer do, I know it's serve and protect, is what they say, but it's, stop the bad guy. What's the quickest way to stop a bad guy? Well, grab the bad guy or like put the bad guy down, or put the bad guy in jail, get him off the street. So that becomes their job. And if they're rewarded, like, thank you for your work for like catching guys and putting them in jail, that's the behavior they spend more time doing rather than, let me stop and assess the situation. Maybe I should talk to the individual before like saying get down on the ground or getting, threatening. We all have bad histories. A lot of us have bad histories with police officers. They pull us over, they're going to give us a ticket. They never pull us over to say, I just want to let you know, amazing driving.
Great
like
driving.
you've been going the speed limit the past 2 miles. I saw you yield very nicely. You stopped and you did. Like you don't get pulled over. You get pulled over and you're told, here's what you did wrong. Now you have to pay a fine for doing that. So we mostly have bad associations with the police officers, unless they're, getting, criminals away from it. So it's a matter of, a lot of our societal constructs are set up to punish people. And then at some point we're like, whoa, that's too much punishment, because that's just how everything's set up. And so if everyone could just stop, assess like, what is it we want out of life and focus on using positive reinforcement to have those things happen more rather than getting upset and yelling at people or punishing them when bad things happen or things they don't like happen. Well, we'd see a huge sea change in terms of, how people behave to one another, how our societal constructs worked. We feel they worked better for us. But again, that's really easier said than done. I think without the magic wand, without a lot of work at like every level of worldwide government, you know, we're not going to see that change overnight. That is a long-term goal.
Here's a good question. But before I get into this, do you want controversy this episode, or should we just keep it mellow?
You can ask a question and they can decide to answer or not.
All right. Fair. In the Middle East and most of Asian countries, the way that parents tend to raise their kids is with, you know, using just a little bit of force, just a little bit. This is just a tiny bit of force. Personally, I see it works because it worked with someone like me. And back in school, I was terrible. Right? And every time I was terrible, yeesh, let's not get into what happens. But basically, I would have to face the wrath of the elder dragon, also known as my dad, right? And why I believe it worked is because this instilled, tattooed in my brain, basically, discipline, how to be good, when it's like when to be serious, when to be funny, right? When to take things as a joke. Also commanded respect, which is I see a lot of kids nowadays. I don't know about in the States, but especially here, the respect of, whoa, this guy is like 5-10 years older than me. I should probably watch what I say. It's completely gone. Why? Because parents less and less have stopped using that tiny bit of force I discussed, you know? So what do you guys think about that? About, you know, like how does this affect a child, or how can this affect a child when they grow up, when you use that bit of force?
Right. So the book that Rob was talking about, and that we'll keep referencing, is called Coercion and Its Fallout by Murray Sidman, and it's really good. And not because we're supportive of coercion, just to make sure that that's clear.
How do you spell coercion, by the way?
Coercion.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
that sounds right.
It's against coercion. It's not telling you how to be better at coercion.
Right, exactly. The fallout of coercion is what it's talking about. So it's talking about how, and he breaks it down into a few components of what's called aversive control.
Yep, there it is.
That's the one.
Really striking cover, you know.
Make it really start.
Hilarious.
What's called aversive control. So aversive control is control by which if you don't do the thing that I'm telling you to do, then you're going to get into trouble, basically, right? Or if you don't do the thing I'm going to tell you to do, then something that you like is going to be taken away. Basically, those two pieces. And the point of the book is that aversive control really works, right? It's very effective, and the types of things you're talking about, Ali, fit into this category as well, right? Like, you only make those mistakes a few times before you're never going to make those mistakes again. But the point of this book is that there is fallout related to this type of aversive control and this type of coercion, in that you see changes in responding on the part of the person that's experiencing this coercion, right? And it can produce changes in the person that's giving it out as well, because it's reinforcing in and of itself, right? If something is happening that you don't want to happen, and you're like, "You stop it right now," and it stops, then you're going to keep behaving in that way moving forward, right? But what can happen is you can see emotional responding on the part of the child. You can see sort of a shutdown overall in responding. You can see other behavior emerge that's also potentially problematic. And then you can have this thing called behavioral contrast, where in the presence of the person that has control, you see one type of behavior. But then in another setting, when that person's not present, you can see a whole other host of behaviors that are perhaps in counterbalance to that. And then you can also have the thing called counter control, which is it's kind of like basic, like rock and roll, punk, teen rebellion, right? It's counter control, right? Like, fight the man. I don't care what you tell me to do anymore. Forget it, right? Like, it's that kind of response. And that comes from being sort of overly controlled. So I think that, you know, they've been studying the effects of using punishment for a long time, and I'm putting spankings and things like that into that category as well. And, you know, there's obviously situations where there's neglect or trauma. That is exceedingly problematic. But and I don't want to be offensive or anything, it does seem that spanking is, well, while it's very effective, it can have some of these other effects long term. And general pediatric recommendation is let's not. Mm-hmm. And that varies country to country, culture to culture. My Southern culture as well is very different, right?
They love spanking
in
down
this
in the
regard.
South. It's very popular.
Mm-hmm.
So, and religion fits into this as well, right? Same. There's a whole chapter on religion in that book. It's really good. So, I might have lost my train of thought.
If your parent, so if you tell your parents shut up, right, and what is the parent supposed to like? How is supposed to react to that? I think Ali it addresses a very important topic that like very trending now. It's like very stereotypical actually that kids like are acting like adults when they're kids.
Yeah. Right. So
it's not just that. See, the thing is with when you said they start going to their rebellion phase, kids here don't have that big of a rebellion phase because I think where we draw the line is respect.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's where that's the most important. The reason I see kids, like especially in the Western countries, go into that rebellion phase, and sometimes it sticks with them all throughout adulthood, right, is because the level of respect between the elder and the younger, the dad and the son, the mother and the son, or let's say the parents, the aunts, the uncles, right? So that level of respect it's very vague.
Mm-hmm.
The clear line of where and when is very vague, right?
Yep.
So,
Ali, I think maybe the better question in that regard would be less, is it you shouldn't do this and you should do that, and more about what is the best alternative given the values of a family, of a culture. Because again, you're in medical school and you have your own podcast, which is like, you gotta have your own podcast these days, right? That's like that's a real sign that you're like doing something right. So, the fact that your parents raised you a certain way, responded to some of your behaviors in a certain way, it didn't, ruin your life. The question isn't, so I'm not going to like go back in time and be like, your parents should have done everything totally different. Cause that's not the question you're asking. And that's not something you're thinking about. It would more be the thought experiment of, would there have been things they could have done differently that used positive reinforcement that would have gotten the same outcome plus some other better things? So a lot of it is not going to be about, when we're talking about positive reinforcement, it's not necessarily going to be a matter of you should never, ever do these things. And if you do, you're a bad person, because everyone's going to do them eventually, because everyone has a breaking point. They get frustrated at noises or what's happening.
We're not infallible. We make mistakes.
Exactly. It's more about, what is it that I value for my family, for my children, for my community, for my country, for my planet? And what are the things that I can do to sort of push things in that direction using as much positive reinforcement in my day as possible? So I'm going to focus on the things that I want to see happen a lot. And I want to, give myself the permission to let a couple of those things go. So, when a kid goes up to you and says, shut up, I don't have to listen to you. You know what? Is it worth telling them, yes, you do have to listen to me? They do. They're kids. Where are they going to go? They don't have any money. They're kind of stunned. So you could yell at them and say, how dare you, can't do that. Be quiet. Don't ever talk to me that way. You got to go to your room. I'm going to take all your electronics away. You can't do. And the odds are they probably won't say shut up in your presence again. But they also might not want to be in your presence for like a couple hours. Or they might go say shut up to other people, just not to you. So, could you have just, sounds like you're frustrated. Why don't you go take a break? Let's all go take a break for a minute. We'll come back in 5 minutes. And then when the child comes back and says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say shut up. I wanted to say, I'm mad at you. And you say, oh, I appreciate you telling me that, or something, or give them a hug for saying it nicely. Isn't that more what you'd want to see happen? It's kind of the same, it comes out to the same outcome, possibly, but now there's less chance of something negative happening.
For me, it's not the fact that he, said shut up to his older, his superior, it's the fact that he said it in the first place. That's
yeah. And
so,
we have to keep in mind though, a lot of, if a kid comes up and says shut up to you, is this the first time they've ever said shut up? Is this a pattern of behavior that has been occurring? And if it's something where it's happening, say in a school setting, there's a chance it's been happening in a home setting as well.
Exactly.
And if you're the teacher who calls that parent and yells at them and says, how dare you let your child learn to say shut up? They're not going to say shut up to me. I'll punish them here. Again, you might get the behavior change you want, but you also now have a parent who really doesn't like you. Maybe they'll do what you say because they want you to not call them anymore. but they probably don't think very highly of you. So the next time you need them to, hey, could you pass in this homework, or could you help with this project, or could you, do something at the school dance, could you chaperone? They're going to be much less likely to listen to you or to want to be in your presence. So again, it's not a matter of you can't do these things. It's a matter of, well, what is it you really want out of interactions? And for the most part, what we want out of our interactions is a positive relationship.
Take your time.
You're good.
Sorry, someone just rang the doorbell, which is very, very odd.
Yeah, right.
I actually, you know what? I agree with you on that. I used to believe in the whole like tiny bit of force. Now, kind of, yes, I do agree with you, but again, like, I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, but like the issue is mainly with
Are you
respect,
studying the scouts?
because today we might be afraid of. Sorry.
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 I just didn't hear what you said. What?
I don't know who that is.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. So today, damn, I lost my. I forgot what I was gonna say.
I think we were talking about.
Sorry.
I think we're
I
talking
know
about
how
like
you feel. It's fine.
respect. I think you're saying, Ali, or you're talking about respect, or that being more the issue.
This is the problem with ADHD.
All right.
It starts going in 100 different directions, and you're just like, oh, where did I go? Where did I leave off? Respect.
Well,
Yes. Okay. It came back to me. How unfortunate. It came back when you were going to move on. Anyways, so yeah, that's mainly the issue. It's basically if you lose that respect, you teach him it's bad to use these kind of words instead of, oh, why did you say that to me? Right? Okay, fine. You're pissed that he said it to you. Tomorrow he's going to say it to someone that's way more dangerous than you are, right? And it'll have
possible.
devastating
It's
and lasting outcomes, right?
Yeah, it's possible. I know one of the things that I have learned firsthand from when I was just in grad school and had no children to now having children is how much of what I'm concerned my kids are going to do. A lot of it is my concern of what they're going to do. It's not necessarily predictive. It's not a matter of like, I don't want you to do this because someday blank could happen. It may be, but it's mostly me who's worried it's going to happen because it'll embarrass me. It'll make me feel bad. And I think a lot of interactions are less about, go back to anxiety. It's less about what's actually going to happen in the environment, so much like, what am I thinking or how am I feeling? Like, how is that going to make me feel? So really, when it comes to respect, I think we're sort of talking about almost two different things. One is, what is the value that we as a family, as a society, as a culture, as a world, what do we want regarding respect? Like, what are the behaviors that we would associate with this is respectful behavior? These are important to my family, to my children, to me, to my wife, to my husband, to, my neighbors. And then, okay, how are we going to build that respect? And there are a lot of ways you can do that. And I wouldn't tell any one person, this is the only way you can build that respectful behavior, because there are a lot of ways to do it. If you said push comes to shove, you have to tell me one, I would want to give you the one that focused on positive reinforcement of the occurrence of those respectful behaviors, rather than just feedback, just telling them don't do the following things. That would be my knee-jerk reaction. But again, depending on, the environment you're in, the way that you want to raise, your family or to be a member of your neighborhood, you may decide that's not actually the way you want to do things. And that's okay. That's not my call to make at the end of the day. You're you, I'm me, and we're going to do things the way that work the best for us.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Right. I wanted to move it to COVID, actually. I just want to talk about, so now you have all these kids at home, right?
Before we do that, one last thing. Mm-hmm. Do you like this book?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. It's a book written for behavior analysts. So, depending on your level of understanding of human behavior.
They walk you through.
They do.
The beginning chapters are a little boring.
It's a lot of basic research. And again, I think you'd have to understand where behavior analysis came from to some extent, or have someone warn you of like, it's going to start with talking about behavior in its simplest form, like looking at, an operant conditioning chamber and looking at rat and pigeon research. Because I think if you just like, oh, this book looks, I don't think that cover would get anyone to grab it off the shelf. But if you grabbed it, like, this looks interesting, I'm curious about this topic, you might be insulted. Like, some people get really insulted when they hear about ABA. They're like, oh, the science of rats, like, I'm not a rat, I'm a human being, and this doesn't apply to me. It's really meant to just give you the simplest explanation of why certain behaviors might occur using that basic research. So again, if you kind of know that going in, that you're going to get a little, primer on, the basics of human behavior, then it is very readable, especially the later chapters where they're talking about big societal issues where there isn't like, and then do this and problem solved. It gets very, it's very complicated issues. It's very, very fascinating that way. Probably not a way we thought of society constructs as well. I think that book's the first time I thought about them that way.
Interesting.
All right, let's go into the COVID.
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to move on to something you said. So traditionally, it's funny how like behavior research is mostly towards like rats, like Pavlov, right, with dogs. Dog training, animal training, right? They use a lot of behavioral principles. So do parents sometimes feel strange about using, like behavioral principles to their own kids? What's your take?
It's important to like preface what it means to get ABA services, right? To parents, and spend the time when you first work with the family to make sure that they don't have those types of misconceptions, right? Because really what we're doing is it's based on the principles of learning, right? And the principles of behavior. And we know about those from both animal research and human research. But that doesn't mean that we should be reducing what we're doing down to the same as animal training, because it's really not, and it's much more complex and nuanced than that. And it's individualized as well, and it's going to be based on socially significant behavior that's going to be meaningful and functional for that individual child and their family, right? So that moves us pretty far beyond, I think, what those sort of simplistic initial studies were examining, although the base of what you can learn from those and glean from them is going to remain true. And I also try to stress to families, like, this isn't something that's just because your child is delayed in this area, right? Like, all of us are experiencing all of the principles of behavior analysis daily, right? I have some of my behavior is reinforced, some of it is punished, some of it's put on extinction. I use discriminative stimuli every day in my environment to determine how I'm going to behave and respond, and the way in which I behave and respond is based on motivating operations as well. All of those things are present in my day-to-day life, and they are in yours too. And that's how you all learned to grow up and talk to one another and go to grad school and do all those great things, right? Like, it's learning, like that's the process here. So helping parents understand like the complexity of that from the beginning and being there present and ready to answer questions for them is really critical. I also think it's critical to help them understand, like, even though we're starting here in a place where we're going to be practicing, simple skills, I want you to share with you my vision for your child long-term, right? So that they can see the way that we're working on this now is only so we can practice these skills. My goal for your child is not that they remain in a situation that seems rote and artificial, right? Like, that's not what we're doing here. We're working towards maintenance and generalization of skills in the natural setting, maintained by naturally occurring reinforcers. That's where we want to get to. And so explaining that to parents and explaining it to them in a way that's friendly, open, allowing them to ask questions and give their input is really important. And if you don't take the time to establish that rapport from the get-go, then you're going to encounter those problems down the road, and you're not going to be able to work as a team as you need to.
So some parents would say, or some people would say, like, if you're a kid with very strong developmental disabilities, there is maybe not a lot you can do when you're growing up. So maybe why put my kid through all this, right? So that they can grow up and still be in assistant care, right? You guys can kind of see what are the things you can push forward. But in regards to special needs kids or special needs adults, right? Is it, you think it's a societal thing that they're kind of left out? Or are there things they can do when they're growing older?
Right, and I think that that's a complex question that you're asking, Ali, actually, because we as a society value individuals that can function more independently and contribute back in employment. And I'm not saying that I'm agreeing with that and not trying to place value on that. I'm just saying that that is sort of a current reality, right? So the question that you're asking is, is complex, and I think that it can vary culture to culture. In the Western culture, that's more the approach that most families have. They say, I want my child to go to college. I want my child to be as independent as possible, right?
Or I want my child to be normal. Sometimes you'll hear.
Yeah. And
normal with the air quotes.
In quotes. Because that's not the goal. We're not here to fix anyone, right? We're here to work on skills that everyone agrees are good skills to work on. And I think that meeting a family where they're at, or helping them along a journey of understanding, like, what is going to be, what are you and your family going to think of, and this child going to think of as a good outcome for them, right? And that may not be living independently, and we shouldn't necessarily place value on that. And that may not be being gainfully employed, and we shouldn't necessarily place value on that. But maybe it's living in a way that is happiest for them, that allows them to access the most happy things, right? And aligning the goals that we have for that child with that long-term plan for them. So I guess it's not a simple answer.
Mm-hmm. No.
To that question, but did I get at what you were thinking about?
You did. No, you did. Mm-hmm. I know it's very complicated, and it's a whole societal structure thing. We kind of value employment. You need to work at a job, and you need to do this and that, but we're kind of, maybe leaving out some people that can't do all these things.
Yeah, and some of it too is going to come down to, how do we think about learning? And I think a lot of folks go back to say, like you see it in science all the time, you see it in psychology, you see it in medicine, the normal distribution curve. And that sense of like, well, some people are exceptional and they're way over here, and most people are in the middle. They're like, who cares? And then some people are below average. And I find when that's the mindset, it really muddies the water in a way I don't think it needs to be. When we think about individuals, and we think about people as, individuals who are going to learn no matter what. Like, everyone learns something, the trite expression, you learn something new every day. You probably do learn something new every day. It might not be a fact or, trivia, but you might learn to do something, or you might engage differently with a person that you did the day before. And when we think about, well, everyone is capable of learning to some extent, then we think about it more as, okay, well, what are your goals as a family? It might be part of that like initial interview of that process. Like, where do you see your child in the future? And then it's less about saying, well, nope, can't do this because they're here on the normal curve, so much as, well, here's where they are. Here are skills you would need. And let's think about what are the most important skills for you, for that individual. And let's keep working towards some of them. And at some point, we might decide some of them don't make as much sense as they did when we started the conversation, because we noticed it's a little harder for them to learn. Or, hey, maybe they, that individual decided, I don't like some of the things that my parent initially wanted me to be doing. And, if they're an adult, that's totally within their human right to make those decisions. So you tailor, what the treatment, what the plan is based on what everyone is interested in and how you're doing. But it's never about, well, you're here, so therefore you can never get here.
Right.
It's about, well, you're here and you would like to do the following things. Let's break it down and talk about, well, how can we go from here to just learning something new? What's the new that we want to learn that'll get you closer to what it is you want out of life? And when you focus on it that way, I think it's a lot easier to work with families that even might not either have pessimistic or overly optimistic viewpoints of like, where will my kid be in 10 years? You don't have to have that conversation right then and there. You can sort of just focus. And then you're working from success after success after success, maybe a small success, maybe a big success, but you're working on successes. You're not sort of talking about, well, here's where we're going to hit failure, and here's where your kid's no good, or here's where you're a bad parent. That's never the question. It's always about, here's what we're going to learn together so that you get closer and closer to the goals that are the most important to you, your family unit, and everything. And I prefer that. I think, especially when you're looking at, say, school systems and inequality in school systems, when you look at it as like, well, here's where we are, and how are we ever going to get here because of all the you've given up on coming up with a solution. When you pretty much said it's impossible, and you throw your hands up. And I don't know about you, but I've never been paid to, come into a room and say impossible and throw my hands up. I mean, usually people pay me to like come in and be like, I have a solution, or here's what we'll do.
But was there ever a time where you guys like worked with a child and it was just like, it's not going to work out, you guys? Like, it's just like he's stuck in that behavioral, like did that ever happen with you guys?
That's our job, right? Is to figure out what to do if there is a behavior that's relatively intractable, right? So the behavior has a really, really long learning history, and or is dangerous, is occurring at, really dangerous levels, right? Like you are more limited in what you can do, but that's our job, is to figure out how can we best help this individual.
Yeah, it's usually more a situation of, given some of the limitations, given some of the challenges, some of maybe the environment is not set up to make this happen right now. So perhaps you need more support at home, or we need to do more work together as a family, or we need to stop working on this skill, work on this other prerequisite skill first so that we can have success with this, initial skill we started with down the road. So it's really a lot of that, not exactly troubleshooting, but sort of that idea of like, what are we going to prioritize?
Yeah.
And certainly, you can only do so much with certain resources. So there are times when you do need to talk about how we need more resources, and that might be more services. We need more professionals involved in this case.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you got on snack duty, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm on snack duty. No,
Don't
that's one
worry.
of my favorite things about being a behavior analyst is the creativity that you get to bring to the problem, right? So you should not be afraid, first of all, to bring in other experts. As a behavior analyst, we don't want to practice outside of our element of, is that a word, competency. So if you have a situation where you're like, I've never worked with this behavior before, or a behavior of this severity before, you should bring in someone to assist you, or you should refer that family to someone else who can best help them, right? Because it's an absolute honor and privilege to be able to serve the students that we serve, and that we don't take that lightly at all. But there's also, and you should not be afraid to think outside the box in the ways in which you utilize those principles of behavior that we talked about before, right? So like that's what we're working with, right? Those principles that I discussed earlier: motivation, reinforcement, prompts in the environment, right? But there's 1,001 ways that you can interpret that and utilize those, and you get the chance to be creative in your approach. So you should never feel hemmed in by what's been done before. When you think about behavior analysis, there's always new directions and new ways that you can approach the situation based in what we know about the science, and that to me is always exciting.
Amazing.
Very well said.
I had one more question I wanted to ask, if you guys have the
Sure.
time for that.
Yeah, sure.
This is a little bit of a more multifaceted one. So COVID, right? Basically, kids haven't been in school for this long amount of time. I want to ask, what do you think are like the main things that kids are missing now that they're not socially in school, physically there? And then what are things that the parents are using to substitute for that time, whether like iPads, TV, Netflix, all that jazz? And what are the possible damages of having your kid on the iPad, social media, right? Break it down.
So I think for kids, a lot of what going to school means is having a set routine, which especially with young children, though it is true for everybody, we like routines as humans. So losing a lot of the cues that cue them into how to behave, what to learn, when to learn, the enjoyment of learning, some of that might be lost. Not all of it, because I know a lot of families are really working hard to try to beef up what's at home. They try to put in routines, try to put in learning opportunities. But for a lot of parents, that's not their level, area of expertise, is like teaching for 6 hours a day is not what they necessarily know how to do with like the most relevant curriculum. But so I think that's certainly being lost. A lot of the social opportunities that we put in schools, especially here, I mean, here in America, but I think even more so in a lot of schools around the world, this is a time to be with your friends and to play and to get to know how to work with other people and to work on teams, and for older students, how to learn together effectively. That's just something you can't really recreate. You can kind of do it over Zoom, but it's not quite the same. It's not ideal. And I hate teaching someone a brand new skill, especially young children, in the worst situation possible. Like, let's teach you something really hard. I'm going to do it, with 50 pounds of weights around your neck at the same time. Like, no, don't make it easy to start. And doing it over Zoom is not easy.
It's like an albatross. Is that
No, I didn't want to use albatross. That feels very, ancient mariner metaphor there. But so certainly the social development is there. I think academically, everyone's concerned, like our kids aren't learning. They didn't learn. That is probably the least of our concerns, because there's so much education that can be taught really fast. And I think one of the nice things about looking at how online learning goes is, man, there are a lot of cool ways to do these 21st century skills where kids are learning to learn and like looking and using technology and using the internet and learning how to find good information and then synthesize it. Like a lot of that now can happen in a way that was harder to do in some ways when they're all together in a school and you've got 23 to 28 kids in one classroom. So I would say it's the cues and the structure, and it would be the socialization. In terms of the second part of the question, like what might be the long-term ramifications, it's certainly hard to say. And I wouldn't worry too much about like long-term ramifications. Really what we have to keep in mind is that for almost every single parent at home, the use of screens and the use of electronics is I can't think of a single parent who's like, oh, we're actually using less screens than we were before. Almost everyone is probably using more because there are so many things we have to be doing in a day, and paying 100% of attention to our children, it just can't happen. That's one of the real positives of school. It allows us as other individuals to work other jobs or to engage in other behaviors that we need to, that we have to engage in, like to make money so we can keep our house and everything. So I think families are probably all doing that. I wish it wasn't so much screen time. I wish I didn't have so much screen time. So step one, I think, is just, it's probably not going to destroy your child. And it's understandable why that isn't a behavior that we're all engaged in a lot more than we used to be. And acknowledging that that's where we are, and that's just the truth right now, and just being aware of it is really all we can do. When things get to whatever the new normal is going to be, whether it's more structured online school, whether it's more in-person schools, whether, hey, vaccine, and let's pretend this never happened, whatever it ends up being, then we can go back and sort of think about, okay, what are the fallout? What are the problems? I think short-term issues are probably more, kids who are used to some level of independence with just, I'm going to go watch TV for the next 4 hours. When that doesn't get to happen anymore, might have some adverse effects. We're certainly planning for, here in Massachusetts, the plan is that school will be in session in the fall in some capacity. You don't have to go. There'll still be an online option. But there are going to be a number of kids that we would never have thought this would be a problem for, who'll probably refuse to go to school. Maybe it's anxiety about COVID. Maybe it's, I have been getting so much more free time that I'll lose when I go to school, because school signals the loss of free time. But we'll probably also see a number of kids who are just like, thank God I get to see my friends. Thank goodness I get to see my friends again. I like having the structure. I miss my teachers. I miss learning. That'll actually compete pretty well with the whole, I got to watch YouTube for the past 10 hours. So we may not see quite as much as I think we're all worried about. I don't think every child is going to say, no, if I can't have a screen in my face, I'm going to have a giant tantrum about it. I think a lot of kids will be happy to have that change, because everything gets boring. As many great videos as there are, watching people open boxes or play video games online or whatever young people like to do these days. It's not my thing. It gets old after a while, and actually seeing someone is probably going to be much more reinforcing than it would have been, say, 6 months ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the change in setting, if kids are actually returning to the school environment, I don't think it will be that problematic for the general education population to just be like, oh, that period of my life is over.
That was fun anyway.
For students that do have a harder time learning or going to school, it may be a pretty significant challenge to return to that environment, I would anticipate. But for the general population, I think they are going to fare okay. I am more worried about students that need more individualized instruction.
Yeah, I know in the district that I work with, there's real focus on acknowledging how traumatic an event this has been for kids. And while most of them will, quote unquote, get over it over time, we really do need to spend a little bit more time, or a lot more time in some cases, or actually in every case probably, to just get them used to coming back to school, to make them feel safe and comfortable, rather than, I think, what happens a lot in schools, at least here in Massachusetts, which is, okay, day one, how was your summer? Don't care. Time to learn. We got to learn all this stuff, and we only got so many days to do it. Not to discount, the caring teachers that I've worked with over the years, but it is that pressure. We got to learn everything. We've only got so many days. And I think a lot of people who might not have acknowledged it are acknowledging that that's just not going to be the way school is this year. Like, if we don't put the effort into just acknowledging how tough it's been for kids and getting them used to whatever our new normal is, we're going to see a lot more kids who are like, you know what, I kind of miss the 10 hours of YouTube I was having at home, and I don't want to go anymore, because school is really aversive and scary, even more so.
Grass is always greener on the other side. So
yeah, exactly.
It's just going to keep happening. Like, now I'm hating the fact that I have to study all of the things I study online. But as soon as we go back to the 7 to 5, I'm just gonna die. I know it. I'm just gonna.
Oh yeah, one of my college friends, he did a PhD MD program, and I know he'd like just finished up everything he needed to do over the years and was getting into the, and he was just like, I think he was so happy to be like, thank God, I'm not a medical student right now, or I'm not a student right now, because it's all the learning, but a lot less of the, I think, the in-person activities, and which I think most of us got into the fields because we like being with people. We like seeing people and working with them directly. When you can't, when you're just doing case studies all day, it's like, yep, okay, great. It's helpful, I guess.
It's like, yeah, especially when it comes to description. Some people might lack the imagination of when I say, okay, this is a rash. Okay, well, what does the rash kind of look like?
I don't want to imagine that at all. Like, nope.
Is it, So like for us, it does really get intense and hard because now we have to get on like Google Images and find different pictures of rashes, and that's not a good idea.
Oh no!
So,
No.
Hell no. So I guess that's all the time we have for today.
Went over time. Thank you so much.
Wow.
That flew by so
what
fast.
An episode. Yeah.
What an honor.
I'm glad you felt it went fast and felt good, as opposed to like, when can we get these two to
honestly,
shut up?
Honestly, this is the fact. Like I thought, like I was surprised. That's why when I was looking down, I was like, oh wait, we went over. But no, that was a good episode.
I'm glad you guys had fun. We really appreciate being invited to talk about behavior analysis. We do it all the time.
You guys coming. It's amazing. I finally got an inside track of AVA. You saw what I did there. Cool.
There's a podcast for you if you want to learn more about it.
Oh yeah, and we will leave a link in the description to their podcast. Me and Ali heavily advise you go over there and watch, especially if you're people who are having kids, have kids, don't know how to deal with them. Instead of using that tiny little bit of force, you never know. You might find a different alternative, right? So if you made it this far into the video, subscribe, check these two out. I really advise it. And I don't know if you've watched any of our other episodes, but this is
there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up? Yeah, anything else you'd like to shout out or say?
No, just if you listen to this and say, I wish I could hear this every week, well, hey, you could certainly listen to ABA Inside Track. We're a podcast for behavior analysts, but if you are someone who is interested in the field of behavior analysis, we have a lot of episodes that are really geared towards more, parent issues or school professional issues. We have a whole episode on school refusal behavior. We have one on anxiety. We have some where we talk to specialists who were working with families during the COVID pandemic and sort of how they had to change their practice. We have some also, if you like the parts where we talked about, working with different individuals, we have some on cultural competence. We have another one coming out pretty soon on social equity. And if you are in the mood to hear more about how you can use behavior analysis in a setting you never even thought of, the business world, we actually are doing our a book club. We do one every year, but we're doing ours in September this year. So we've got an episode where we talk about bringing out the best in people in the business world. You're going to make the most widgets in your business. So it's a little different than our typical topics.
And we do have another co-host, Jackie, who just couldn't be here today, but I don't want you to not know that there's a third one of us.
There is. So if you're like, I love their two voices, but I want one more voice. Okay, we got you. We got you covered.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you guys. I don't know if you've watched any of our old episodes. We usually sign out with a salute to cover the count.
Okay.
But since there's both of you, you can
let's see.
both do a whole hand-on-hand kind of action, whatever you see fit. Anyways, peace.
Peace.